I have to stand before you and confess that I am a normal guy. You know, some of the guys that you had a chance to listen to over the last, semester or years before that are incredible, and they've had fantastic exits. I'm still in the middle of my dream, and so I'm going to really kind of talk to you about that a little bit. I'll tell you a little bit of the story of how we got going, and then we'll probably, obviously, there's a question and answer series that we'll jump into, but first and foremost, I'm honored to be with you. I know that you are working tirelessly, probably preparing for finals and getting those final projects all wrapped up, so I wish you the very best. The happiest day of my life outside of my marriage was the day that I finished school. And how many of you, this is your last semester? Raise your hand. Woohoo, right? And as I finished school, I kind of, we started Corporate Alliance between my junior and senior year. And so I was doing full-time work at school and full-time work at work for my last year of school. And so I was so excited to be done. And when I graduated, I said, I'm never, ever reading another book again because I was just so sick of it. Well, about probably a year or so after I graduated, we were riding in the car, my business partner and I, on the way into the office. And my business partner was an individual who had dropped out of college after 2 years, and he was just one of those serial entrepreneurs. Whereas I was an individual who fell into entrepreneurship. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we're riding in to work. We happen to be brother-in-laws. And he leans over to me and he goes, Jeff, he goes, where do you see yourself in 5-10 years from now? And I thought back and reflected a little bit. And I don't know how many of you have had a class from Norm Nemro. A few of you? My favorite lecture at BYU was when Norm Nemro told his story about how he had retired at age 35. Has everyone heard that story? It's a great lecture. It's the only lecture that I can actually remember from BYU. It was Norm Nemro's lecture. And so I remember it. Norm had gone back to BYU and was willing to teach for free. And I'm thinking about that, and I said, Jared, as soon as we make it, I'd love to go back to BYU and teach for free. And he turns to me and he goes, well, Jeff, I don't know if you're even going to be with the company in 5 to 10 years if you don't start reading. He said, because what's happened is you graduated from college, and it was as if you thought the world owed it to you. And you're like, all right, I have my degree. I've paid the price. Now pay me back, world. And he goes, that mentality will get you nowhere. He says, you've got to feed your mind. And he said, every single day you need to be doing something where you're learning something new and reading. It was one of the best pieces of advice that I had in my life. And so there really have been these decision points or these points of inflection that I've had in my life. And that was one of the most key critical times, was when someone who I hold in very high regard turned to me and told me the truth, even though it was incredibly painful. Now, we argued for probably half hour about how I thought he was just, attacking me. But in all honesty, it was one of the best pieces of advice that changed my life. From that point on, I began to read a book, and we have now inside of Corporate Alliance, we have a corporate reading program that for every employee who starts, we give them a card that talks about the culture of Corporate Alliance, some of the pieces, and on the back side, we have mandatory books that they need to read, and then we have optional reading, really so that they can continue to feed their minds. And so one piece of advice I would tell you is you will probably be so ready when you graduate to never have to read again, but please continue your search for learning. But I'll back up and kind of give you the brief story of how we got started in Corporate Alliance, and then highlight maybe a couple of nuggets of things that we've learned through the whole process. So as I mentioned, we started Corporate Alliance between my junior and senior year. I came home from a mission and applied to the business school. How many of you are not in the business school? Raise your hand. I was one of those. I applied to the business school and I didn't get in, and so I went into the Kennedy Center to get an international studies degree. Any of you international studies majors? raise your hand. I remember the first lecture. There's probably 300 of us in there. And they said, now, I'm sure a lot of you tried to get into the business school, and you didn't. And so you're here. And we're like, yeah, nodding our heads, yeah. It's us. He says, well, the good news is that 97% of our graduates have jobs. The bad news is that you need to start right now looking for that job. And so I'm a sophomore thinking, oh my goodness, I've got to start looking for a job right now, and I have no idea what I want to do. But that was an interesting experience. So I got my degree in international studies and Russian, and I knew I had to have an internship. So I did an internship in Ukraine. I spent a summer in Ukraine. We did some different things that aren't really pertinent to what we did, but it was a wonderful experience. I came back from Ukraine going into my senior year. And I had gotten married the year previous, and my wife owned a business. She owned a hair salon and was actually really doing quite well. She was pretty successful. For college students, we felt really, really rich. You know, we were living in, at the time, what was Y-View housing. We didn't have any kids. We owned our cars, and my wife's making $55,000 a year. I'm thinking, this is the richest I've ever been, you know, because I grew up not having a whole lot. I was the oldest. And my brother-in-law says, hey, I've got this idea for a business. Do you want to work for me part-time while you finish your degree? And I said, sure. So for $8 an hour, I was Jared's do everything, anything. Hey, we need to go to the post office. Take this. I was his basically a little assistant. And this was in September of 2000. About 2 months in to this experience, I loved what we did. We're in the business of building relationships, bringing business owners and executives together, and really helping them become friends. I tell my grandma what I do, and she goes, are you kidding me? People pay money to become friends? So yeah, Facebook's $1 billion. Friends is a big deal. Business is about relationships, and so we are facilitators of business relationships. But anyways, I loved what we were doing. And so we were riding in the car one day, and I said, hey, Jared, I love what we're doing. Would you be open to me working for equity? And he looked at me, and he says, well, yeah, absolutely. And so we recalculated my pay to $40,000 a year in equity. And I worked for the next 2 years for equity. Well, right now, that was one of the best decisions that I ever made. At the time, it was basically working for free for 2 years, because at the end of the 2 years, I could probably sell my equity for close to nothing. That's about what it was worth. And so I had given 2 years of my life to an education on what we were engaged in corporate alliance. The magic of that experience for me was I got to do something that I loved so much that I was willing to do it for free. And I don't know that very many people have that opportunity. I have 5 little boys. My oldest is 9, my youngest is 2. My second boy is a die-hard fan of anything athletic. He's 7 years old, and if I want to know what game is on tonight or the rest of this week, I can just say, hey, James, who are the Jazz playing? Oh, it's so-and-so, and you know what their stats are, and he'll break it down. So one day we're riding home, and my son James turns to me. He goes, Dad, if you didn't do corporate alliance, what would you do for a living? And I gave him probably some lame answers, and he wasn't satisfied. He goes, well, Dad, you know what I want to be? I want to be a professional basketball player. So what he was really looking for is, Dad, do you love sports as much as I love sports? Being a professional basketball player is the only thing that I could probably equate to I would be willing to do it for free if I could, just like with corporate alliance. So there are very few opportunities in life that we have to be able to do something to where we would be willing to do it for free. That's what happened for me in the first 2 years of building corporate alliance. At the end of the 2 years, I then went from making equity to my first W-2 of that year was a grand total of $33,000 for the year. So here I am now, 3 years removed from college, with a degree where I thought the world owed it to me. And I've just worked for free for 2 years or for equity. And now my first W-2 comes in at a grand total of $33,000. And the business was at a point where, you know, like I told you, my equity was pretty much worthless at the end of the 2 years. We were at a point where we had to raise money. We had burned through all the capital that we had. The way we had funded the business was, one, Jeff worked for equity, and two, Jared had a home that he had built, and he pulled all the money out of the house, and he lived on that money for 2 years. So we were finally to a point where we had burned through all of our capital. Now, why would we do this? You know, like I went to classes that talked about, you know, you give yourself a runway, and once you're at the end of the runway, you cut bait, right? Bad idea, something. We got to get out and do something different. So why did we keep going? Well, the why for us, we kept going is we felt this incredible drive that we were going to change the world. Now, I don't know how to describe it. It sounds incredibly cheesy, but we felt like we were building a revolutionary kind of business. I believe there are jobs, careers, and callings, right? Which of the three do you think Oprah had? Or at least she felt she had? A calling, right? My dad worked for Chevron for 25 years. He had a fantastic career. Now, when I was a telemarketer and I couldn't wait to get off the phones, I had a job, right? So a job, a career, and a calling. We felt like we had a calling, that we were doing something that was going to change the world, and it was revolutionary. So as we engaged in this, we thought, oh my goodness, we got to raise money because we're going to run out of money. And so who do you turn to? Obviously, the first people you turn to are your family, your friends, anybody you can trust. We turned to some of our key clients and pitched them on it. At the time, my in-laws were mission presidents, and so I was privileged enough to live in their house, which means really, really cheap rent. And it was very much needed at the time. And my dad came to visit. My dad had been working overseas, and my dad came to visit one time. We had just had a baby. We were incredibly poor because my wife was done. She had sold the salon and took all that money, and we stuck that money into Corporate Alliance. And my dad looked at me and he said, "Son, what are you doing? You have a degree, you had a lump sum of cash from your wife's business, and now you have nothing other than this dream." Well, that's another one of those key times in my life where there was a big decision that had to be made, and I looked across from my dad. I'm the oldest and only son. I have 4 sisters. And I said, "Dad, there have only been 2 other things in my life that I've been more sure about. One was serving my mission. I knew that I was out there until the end of the time, and then I would come home. The second one was marrying my wife. I'm married to the most incredible woman in the world, and just an absolute gift. And I knew that those 2 decisions were right decisions in my life." And I said, "Dad, I feel the same exact way as I did about that." And he looked at me like only a father can, like, "What have I done? I've taught you to follow your heart and your passions and your dreams, and now I think you're making a wrong decision, but yet you feel committed to it." And he says, "Okay, son, well, good luck." And I says, "Well, Dad, I have a question for you. Will you invest $50,000? And what do you think he said? He said, "Is it a better investment than milk cows?" How do you answer that one? Any of you are dairy farmers in here? Anybody have milk cows? Is it a better investment than milk cows? He asked me that because we grew up in a farming community, and I says, "Well," and this was my stupid answer. I says, "Well, yeah, Dad, cows eventually die." And he laughed, and he said, "All right, I'll give you a check." Now, the reason that check meant so much is this in 2004. I'm just going to I'm giving you numbers just to kind of maybe put it in perspective a little bit. In 2004, my dad got a job to go overseas into Russia. At that point, he was making, before he went over, he was at the top of his earning potential. When I graduated from high school, my dad made $56,000 a year. Okay? That's when I graduated from high school. 4 years later, when he got the job and went to Russia, he was in the low 90s a year. So for my dad to come up with $50,000 to invest in his son was a significant sacrifice. A sacrifice that I knew full well was a huge sacrifice. And so when he was asking me, is it a better investment than cows? It was probably a cover-up for him swearing, saying, son, you know how much this money means to me. And I said, Dad, I believe we're going to do something great with it. Okay? That point was a significant step in our business opportunity because not only did my father invest, my father-in-law invested. And have you heard the analogy of burning the ships? You know, early settlers came over to to what's now the United States or the New World, and it was hard, and so they wanted to go back. And so to prevent them from going back, they would burn the ships. So they had to figure out how to make it work in the New World. I believe at that point was the point where we burned the ships. Because not only had we put all of our chips in the middle of the table, we'd also then taken my dad's and my father-in-law's chips and put them all in the middle of the table as well. When you go to bed at night, you think about that. Okay, that's the part of entrepreneurship that I believe refines you. And that's the part that I'm so grateful for. As I had a list of things of what am I grateful for in entrepreneurship, first thing I'm grateful for that I had an opportunity to work for free to discover my passion. That's one of them. A second one was that I know what it feels like to carry the burden of somebody else's money. True stewardship, fiduciary responsibility, I understand what that is because of the sacrifice my father made. 2004, so we started in 2000. We're now here in 2004. We then continued to just kind of plod along until 2007. 2007, we open up our second office and begin to get some traction. And in 2008, we go from being, you guys are crazy. This business model is flawed. You guys are idiots. Why are you doing this? To, wow, you guys are geniuses. This is amazing. Nothing had changed other than we had endured 7 or 8 years in the wilderness. One of my favorite passages in the Scriptures is in Nephi, because how long were they in the wilderness? 8 years. And I could empathize with what years in the wilderness must have felt like, because then we could appreciate the promised land a lot better. Well, things changed, and to use a scriptural analysis or analogy, so they went from the wilderness to the land bountiful, which was better than the wilderness, but still not the promised land. That part right there is another point that is a hard place to get out of, because it's comfortable. When you go from not having made much money to now where you're making comfortable amounts of money, but you're not living the dream, you're not living up to the dream that you know is a huge part of what you're doing, you're selling yourself short. So 2008, 2009 were our land of bountiful, where we knew that there was, the promised land out there, but we knew we would have to, so to speak, build a ship to get there. Our first office was in Provo, because we lived here. Our second office was in Salt Lake, because it's close. And we knew that we needed to replicate and take this thing to different markets across the country so that we could prove the model and then scale it. So the last couple of years have been our building of the ship and now getting ready to scale it. I will confess to you that the hardest part of this whole experience has been when you go from making no money to making some money to then having to put your chips in the middle of the table again. And you double down. Now, obviously, if you don't learn from the mistakes that you made early on, you're just plain stupid. But it's still hard to push those chips to the middle of the table and go for it again. That's the point we're at. So I know you have a privilege when you come to this lecture series to hearing people who have had an exit. We're not there yet. We haven't had the exit. But I do get asked a question a lot of, Jeff, if you had your magic number, then what would you do? What's the question they're really asking with that question? If you had your magic number, then what would you do? What are they asking? Bam! Now, I count myself as one of the richest people in the world because I am doing what I love. So if I did have my magic number, I would probably take a few more Fridays off, but I would still do what I do. Because I worked 2 years for free, I discovered that. Okay? That's a rich blessing that I had. So even though I only made $33,000 at year 3, so if you average that over a 3-year period, I made, what, $11,000 a year for 3 great years. That's after I graduated from college. I was making more money when my wife worked than I was in college. But now I know that if I have my magic number, I'm doing what I love. So my advice, one of the huge pieces of advice that I would give to you now is discover your strengths and discover your passion. And I guarantee you, you don't have to work somewhere for free for 2 years to find yours. How many of you believe you know what your passion is? Raise your hand. Of those who raised their hand, half of them raised them like, yeah, I do. The other half were like, I think I do. And some were like, I hope I do. You know what I mean? For those who are at least somewhere there, you're in a much better place than I was when I graduated from BYU. Because if you can discover your passion and figure out how to make money doing it, you'll be one of the happiest people in the world. Okay? So we're now in 2012, almost 2013. We have 5 offices. We just opened an office in Southern California earlier this year for Corporate Alliance. And so we're in the process of scaling what it is we do with Corporate Alliance. As I mentioned to you, we're in the business of having business owners and executives pay a monthly fee to come to events to meet other business owners and executives. They pay anywhere from $100 a month to $5,000 or $6,000 a month to come to events. Why do you think people would pay money to go to events to meet other people? Shout it out. Anybody? Networking. How many of you get excited to go networking? You do? Good for you. Because most people don't. You know, most people think, oh, it's tough. Well, let me ask you a question, and I can probably find out how many of you actually really do dread networking. How many of you came into today's class and sat with someone you didn't know and struck up a conversation with them, and it wasn't because you were trying to get a date? Now, if that's the case, I don't want you to have to raise your hand, but how many of you came in for the sole purpose that I know that in 10 to 15 years from now, the people in this room are going to be the movers and shakers of this country? How many of you invested the few minutes before the class to get to know them? Raise your hand high if you did today. One of close to 200. And it is a female. It could have been for a date. Oh, it's okay. Okay, good. It's all right. But from a standpoint, sorry to embarrass the young lady there with that comment. It's like when the kiss cam comes and you're not really together right at a game. But 1 out of 200. Okay, let's take the rest of today. How many of you from the rest of today in any of your classes sat next to someone so that you could network with them or build a relationship with them that could further your business career down the line later on? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, around 10 to 12 of 150 to 200. The reason that people will pay $100 to $5,000 a month because people don't like to do networking. They don't. But they know that there's a benefit. You all know that as you look around the room that there's a great opportunity in the future with the people that you're with. But yet the uncomfortability of getting out of that to go sit with someone and strike up a conversation and not appear to be awkward or weird is what keeps us from doing it, right? Kim Basinger says that we all are like 7th graders in a lunchroom. Do you remember being in 7th grade with your lunch tray and turning and looking and going, where am I going to sit? And that horrible, awkward feeling, right? Okay, once you become a seasoned business executive, the only thing different is now you have an ego, right? You're everything. At least that's what you're telling yourself in your head, that I am Mr. Cool. And so then you start treating people like crap. And then people hate you for the right reasons. You know? Whereas when you're in 7th grade, you're just insecure. When you're a business executive and you're insecure and arrogant, you're cheating on both sides. Okay? I want to show you a video that hopefully will help you understand this arrogance that sometimes we feel and how we can overcome it. I'll show you the video for a couple of reasons. One's it breaks me up talking, and you might enjoy the video. It's about 2 minutes long, and then I'll talk about the video after. It's this Kim Aviles one. Let's go ahead and show it.
Son-in-law ride down on a white horse and pick up his bride. Moral of the story? Don't judge a quote by its cover. Linda's daughter married a prince of India, and the Philadelphia marriage received 3 additional Indian weddings as a result.
That was obviously not a Mormon wedding, right? So the $836,000 price tag. We teach a principle of avoid relationship arrogance and build relationships just because. Because what happens in the business setting is, imagine you all have name tags and it says your name and it says the company that you're with. And you come into a room where there's round tables and you sit down at the table and you look around the table and you go, yes, yes, no, 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 yes, no, yes. And all you're doing is doing what? Judging based on the name tag and the company. Can these people potentially help me in the next 30 days? And we call that networking, right? Because I have objectives that I need to, I need to close business right now. Well, what happens when we do that is everyone that we go no to, we cancel out the opportunity that lies within them and within the opportunities of their city of influence, as we call it, their sphere of influence. Oftentimes you don't get to see the story of what happens, what opportunities are missed out when you exercise relationship arrogance. So when you walk into a classroom and you sit down with somebody and you think, what's this guy ever going to do for me? It's the same thing as walking into a room with name tags where they have names and saying no to that person. Okay, this particular event is a real-life story. Kim Aviles was one of our clients. We were teaching this principle, and she says, I've got a story for you that'll just kill you. This is her story. She talked about this story. It was a meeting planners event. And at meeting planners events, you're supposed to have 50% meeting planners and 50% people that might be having a meeting or an event. So someone had invited this Linda gal to the event. That person missed out on the opportunity. All of the other meeting planners there missed out on the opportunity to talk to Linda. She was sitting alone. One lady even was so bold to say, what are you doing talking to that lady? Wow, I'd love to see her face when she heard the story, right? Then you go to the hotel, and the wedding planner goes down, turns around, and says, don't waste my time. So Kim goes down and books an $836,000 wedding. I showed this to some hotel people, and they said, you know what my annual quota is on group sales? For our hotel, it's $750,000. So one deal was the entire year's quota for this particular individual. You have a rich opportunity while here at Brigham Young University to interact with some of the best and brightest. And one of the benefits is that you're at one of the best and brightest universities with some of the best and brightest. I would say that one of the shortcomings that you're going to have to overcome is that you're not used to having to go to a bar to pick up on people. In the rest of the world, they get to practice networking all the time because they go to the bar and they pick up on each other. And they practice. They practice over and over and over again. Now, they're doing it for social reasons. We have church dances where we come and we are socially awkward, right? And we say, I'm going to go get some punch. And you hang around the punch bowl. Or you go, this is lame, and you leave. So thank heavens we have family home evening groups, or no one would ever get married, right? So what I'm saying to you is because of the environment that I'm so glad we have, you have to find other opportunities to practice sometimes being socially awkward to build relationships. Because when you get out in the business world, you'll want to maximize the opportunities that come from relationships. And you want to know how to be able to build those relationships. And or you'll join Corporate Alliance and spend somewhere between $100 a month and $5,000 a month to have us help you not be so uncomfortable doing it. But that's the power of relationships. So I want to give you an exercise that I hope you do. I hope that sometime between now and this time tomorrow, you'll have met someone new just because. You'll find something out about them, and you'll connect with them, and you'll try to stay connected with them. So when we talk about that, people go, well, what are we going to talk about? Oh, I don't know. If you've never talked to another individual, well, let me ask you a question. How many of you have never, ever been on a date in your life? I figured that I was safe in that one, but I felt really bad if someone was going to raise their hand. I was going to set them up right now. Okay, so we've all been on good dates and bad dates, right? Where there was a lot to talk about or where it was socially awkward for both of us and we just wanted to get the date over with, right? We all can relate. We've all had a good and a bad one. Well, something happens when we put on these business suits and we're Mr. Cool that all of a sudden the ego gets in the way and we just need to go back to basics when building relationships. So going back to basics, relationships are built in three ways. You learn about an individual so that you can discover their needs and wants. Why do you want to discover their needs and wants? Why? To please them. Why? Absolutely. It's called the Law of Reciprocity. You learn about an individual to discover their needs and wants so that you can serve their needs and wants. And as you serve their needs and wants, the Law of Reciprocity kicks in and they'll want to serve you back, right? Or they'll want to learn about your needs and wants so they can serve you back. You think about a good date. You kind of talked about some things and you found out things. You discovered their needs and wants, and maybe it was conversation or maybe it was something that you then did for them. That's how relationships are built. So I want to show you one more video that illustrates this point in a business setting. Some of you are familiar with the company OGIO. Have you heard of the company OGIO? They make bags, gear bags, different things like that. This is a story about OGIO and one of the key relationships that they wanted to build and how they followed that process of learn, serve, grow.
From being an unknown to being an authentic brand in the motocross industry, OGIO needed to build relationships with the athletes, because if the pros used it, the consumers bought it. The leaders at OGIO did this by using the Learn, Serve, Grow cycle. OGIO's first team manager was a good friend of Travis Pastrana, the best recognized ambassador of motocross at that time, and introduced him to some of the executives at OGIO. As they got to know Travis, they learned he'd always dreamed of doing a backflip into the Grand Canyon. Instead of dismissing this as impossible, the OGIO executives really listened to what Travis wanted, then went to great lengths to make it happen for him. Travis made the jump twice, and on his second jump, he pulled a backflip, and just to show he was in control, did a heel clicker and let the bike go. The footage was all over the news and talk shows, and the whole industry was asking, what company took Travis down to the Grand Canyon and did this? Because OGIO took the time to learn about and serve Travis, the company went from not even being recognized as a brand in motocross to being the #1 gear bag brand in the industry in less than 18 months.
This was his first jump, so pay close attention. His very first jump, there's the bike. See how close the bike is to him. And the reason I want to show you that one is his first jump is Travis is an only child. He was 18 years old, just barely, and his mother is standing as close as she can to the edge of the Grand Canyon to watch her son do this. She passes out. She passes out because she sees her son. She never ever sees the chute. Any of you base jumped? Okay, this is Jeff's description of how you have to base jump, I guess. You got to get your body horizontal as fast as possible so that the chute can grab. Well, if you remembered, the bike was really close to him, so he's trying to push the bike away. When he pushes the bike away, it puts his body up like this. So then he's swinging his arms, trying to get horizontal as fast as possible. His mother sees him swinging his arms and never sees the chute, so she passes out. Well, obviously there was a second jump, so his chute worked. But the amazing thing about that experience was, as it mentioned, it took OGIO from being an unknown to a major player in the gear bag industry. Suzuki was the bike that he rode on. Suzuki paid Travis at the time $2 million to ride a Suzuki. He got a phone call right before he made the jump. Suzuki attorney said, "We're sorry, Travis. We love you, but we can't have your name on this in case something goes wrong." So he rode an OGIO bike. They put stickers all over it, made it an OGIO bike. And what do you think, as the law of reciprocity kicks in, you know, they do this great serve for Travis. They arranged everything and put it all together. How do you think Travis felt about OGIO genuinely after that? They were pretty tight, right? Because Travis had an agent, OGIO had to pay $50,000 for the endorsement thereafter. OGIO wouldn't have charged them anything to wear an OGIO hat, carry a bag, and always talk about OGIO, because they had done something that built a real relationship. So my advice to you today is find your passion. Do something to discover your strengths and find your passion. And please invest your time and resources in building relationships and building your knowledge. Because in my opinion, the only things that we can take out of this life with us are the knowledge that we acquire and the relationships we build. Thank you so much for your attention. Have a great day.